Christian parenting.
So we continue in our parenting challenge series. Today we're going to talk about self-care for families that are in long-term special needs situations. Hey, my name is Jay Holland, and this is Let's Parent on Purpose. It's a podcast to help you thrive and not just survive your parenting years. Each week, I'll bring you an insight or an interview that will help strengthen your marriage, your family, or your personal walk with Jesus. And if you find it helpful, I encourage you to subscribe, share it with your friends, and you're welcome to go to letsparentonpurpose.com to find all kinds of past articles, issues, and resources to help your family. Having done more than 250 episodes of Let's Parent on Purpose, I realized that not every episode is relevant for every family, but sometimes it's just important to hit topics that for those that need it, nothing could be more relevant. And I feel like that today about the topic that we're doing. I understand that hopefully most families are not in a long-term special needs situation, but for those who are, it kind of dominates everything that's happening in their life. And so this can be a really important podcast topic. So if you're not in that situation, there's still a lot of wisdom to be gleaned as we talk through some of these answers, because some of it is still relevant. But I would more say pass this along to a family that you know is in this situation. Just to give you a little street cred, I don't have a guest on today. Kind of the background on this, I have a friend who's a counselor. Actually, she's been on the podcast a couple times, Elijah Huey. She was doing a conference at her church for special needs families, and they'd sent in a list of questions for her to answer, and she passed them on to me because she knows a little bit of my street cred in this situation. If you're newer to Let's Parent on Purpose, a little background. In my family, I've walked through single parenting, through the death of a spouse. We have had a 3.5 year leukemia journey with our son, and as well as foster and adoptive, where we have had a number of different special needs challenges, including reactive attachment disorder, some different mental disorders and disabilities. So, and a couple of those, like the cancer journey and the foster and adoptive, have happened at the same time. So we're in a relatively stable period in our life right now, and so it's a good time to reflect. So I was sent a bunch of these questions, and I thought, it would be really helpful for us to just walk through some of these questions. I'll get through as many as I can today. I wrote a bunch of stuff out, and I think that many of us that listen to this, you could benefit from it, or a family that could. So one other thing, sometimes I mention resources in the midst of the podcast, and I put those in the show notes, which actually it's just, if you go to the letsparentonpurpose.com website, there's not a link that says show notes anymore. It just says podcast. But if you go there, each episode has its own link, and I'll put any of the resources mentioned in that link. The easiest and quickest way to get that, though, is just be a part of the Things for Thursday email list. I send out an email every Thursday that has the last few episodes and links directly to the webpage for those. That would have all the show notes, resources, as well as other things that I've found that I like or that are helpful. And if you want to be a part of that Things for Thursday email list, you'll join over 1,000 subscribers to it. You just simply text the word THINGS, THINGS, to 66866. That's THINGS to 66866, and then let me send you the links to the resources so you don't have to remember to look them up all the time. With that said, let's jump right into these questions. There's a number of them, and I have a lot of thoughts. Hopefully they'll be helpful. Remember, I am not a professional counselor. I am not a professional therapist. I'm a pastor and a dad who's just walked through a lot of manure and a lot of challenges in my family, as well as those around me. So first is just simply this question. I've got 10, I don't know how many questions there are here, 7 or 8. We might get to them all. Just questions that I'm going to give that were sent in by parents in special needs situations, and then I'll give you my thoughts and responses. So the first question was suggestions for self-care when you have a special needs child who requires a lot of supervision and is very busy. So these are not in order of importance, just ones that came to me. First off, I think it's really important. I'm going to assume, I'm going to make the assumption that you have a church. All right. And if you don't, you need to get connected to a church. And I know if we're still in the midst of the COVID craziness, it's harder to be connected to a church. Doesn't mean that it's not worth the effort. And so if you're involved in a church, be honest with your church. And I know this is really hard, especially if you have a special needs situation. You'll be less connected in your church sometimes, but you need to be honest with your church. You can seek out couples or families who can take on your family as a service opportunity. If you have people who genuinely volunteer, don't feel obligated to pay them. There are actually people who know that they're serving Jesus by doing this, and you need to just let them. And so this is really hard sometimes for families because we've been raised on this mindset of self sufficiency or pride, or we don't want to owe people things. But I'll tell you, a long term special needs situation will sink your entire family. And Jesus has put you in a church so that they can love on you during this time and they can be blessed by the Lord. So if you're always up, if you feel this incredible burden to pay them or pay them back all the time, then you're robbing Jesus of the ability to pay them far more than what you can. So if you're in the situation and you can pay them to do it, great. But if not, and they're volunteering, don't rob them of their blessing. Another thought. There tends to be the case where one spouse is better at being proactive about self-care than the other spouse. That's the situation in mine. I'm just kind of more proactive in that way. The proactive spouse needs to be helpful in encouraging and empowering the other spouse to carve out times and practices. Then they need to give them the freedom to do what they want during that time. So for me, self-care looks like rigorous exercise because like I get a lot of my stress out by wearing myself out physically. To my wife, it also often looks like getting the space in her house in order because otherwise she can't relax. Now, if we flip flop that, and Emily were to tell me, Jay, I really want you to relax by cleaning our home, I'll be like, well, why are you punishing me? And in the same way, if I say, Emily, I think the best thing for you to relax is to completely wear yourself out with exercise, she would be like, why are you mad at me? So you've got to give that other spouse the freedom. If you're giving them the space and you've helped proactively give them the opportunity to do something that helps them feel like they're decompressing, you don't then get to force what they do. Let them be them and just be happy that they're taking the opportunity. One thing that's really helpful for me as well is to come up a list of things that I aim to do each day. So these are all in the category of suggestions to just kind of help with chronic taking care of yourself and taking care of your family. When you're in a long term special needs situation, it's easy to feel deflated and defeated. Like, what in the world did I get done all day? I felt like I just ran in circles. And so what I did is, and this has kind of been over time, this has built, but I have come up with a list of things that, you know what, I want to do these little things each day. And then no matter what happens, if I was able to do the majority of them, I can say that I did the kind of things that will long term make me the kind of person that I want to be. I want to be a growing follower of Jesus. I want to be helpful. I want to, stimulate my mind. There's all of these things. And for me, lists just help. My idea is that if I do the majority of these things, the majority of days, not every day, then what I'm doing is I'm casting a majority of votes to being the kind of person that I want to be long term. So my list consists of things that I'm really good at and also some things that I'm really stink at. And I don't beat myself up when I don't do them, but it is a reminder to correct the course. So I'll I'm tempted to not tell you any list at all, but just for I'll give you my list, and my list is not your list, but I do think it's really helpful if you're in a long term special needs situation. It's really helpful to have a list of like these are the little things that I would like to do each day, because even if the day was complete chaos, if I never got out of the house, if I never put clothes on during the day, if I just cleaned up poop and vomit all day, I did these things and long term they make me the kind of person that I want to be. So here's my list. Caveat: it's long, and I rarely do them all on the same day. Prayer, time in the Word, writing out one thing that I'm grateful for each day. And that's literally like one line in one sentence. I want to intentionally encourage at least one person each day. I want to track my food. Now, I'll tell you something about that. It used to be that my list said eat clean, but quite frankly, I don't want to eat clean. I like ice cream. I like pizza. I like having that variety. And for me, if I can have an opportunity to do that, then I want to do it because, especially if you're in a long term special needs situation, like you need some of the joys of life, and God gave you taste buds. What I don't want to do is eat such a volume of things that I'm just slowly adding on weight over time, and then I become an elephant. So track my food, and if I track my food, I tend to stay within reason on what I eat. Learn something. That's one of the things on my list, and I don't care what it is, no matter how small or how big, just something to, like, kinda stimulate my mind. Journal. Now, with journaling, I have this 5-year journal that I use, and I love it. It has a little 5-line summary of each day, so I fill it out the next morning for the day ahead or the day that just happened, and I just kinda walk through what happened in the day and, perhaps how I'm feeling emotionally about it. And it's been really neat as the years start to go by and I look back and see all of the ways that God has blessed and taken care of me and my family and all of the things that He solved and the things that were incredible crises that are no longer crises. And then other things that I just didn't realize how long that we were struggling with this until I look and see that I was still talking about this stuff 3 years ago. So that little daily journal exercise has been incredible for me and I use a Levenger 5-year journal. So I'll try to put a link to that in the show notes. A Levenger 5-year journal is the one I use because it just holds up. It's like $50, which is a lot, but that works out to $10 a year. And I'm on year 5 of a journal and it's holding up really well. Also on my list is midday prayer, just pausing in the middle of the day for a little bit of prayer. Mindful rest, which could be a short nap, 5 minutes, anything as long as I pay attention to the fact that I'm just kind of refocusing for the day, where I'm getting my mind off of the hamster wheel and just kind of mentally taking a breath. And then the last thing on my list is play. So that's prayer time in the Word, writing something encouraging or grateful, intentionally encouraging, tracking my food, learning something, journal, midday prayer, mindful rest, and play. Now, rarely do I hit all of these, and rarely do I hit almost all of these in a day. But I do hit a majority of these each day. And by doing so, I'm able to reinforce to myself that my life is not in vain and that I'm investing in my future self and investing in being a better person and a better disciple of Jesus as life goes on. And that helps me to not feel like I'm spiraling out of control. That's just, again, this was a list that I built over several years. You might start with 2 things or 1 thing. But having a list of things that I'm investing in myself for that I can kind of track and keep track of has been really therapeutic for me. Additionally, in my life, it's pretty crucial for me to get up before any of my kids. I take the first part of my day to do a number of the things on the list. I do a little walk around my neighborhood. I pray. I get my time in the Word. I fill out my journal. So half the things on my list are done before my kids get up. I also get coffee in my system and I sit in the quiet. And that really changes how I'm ready to interact with my wife and my kids as the day goes on. Other suggestions for self care: if you've got the money, pay for somebody to clean your house or to do some other chore that frees up time and emotional energy. Sometimes it may be where you're able to barter with another special needs family. So, like, you watch their children for a couple hours in exchange for them taking your child for a couple hours. The special needs kids are hard, but it's not always necessarily twice as hard to watch 2 special needs kids as it is to watch 1. And so you might find families like this that are willing to barter with you because they also get the benefit of the break. If you can't find somebody to clean, here's actually, I'll do a little advertisement here. Maybe you don't have the money to pay somebody to clean your house all the time. We don't. There was a period of time where somebody gifted us money to help get our house clean when we were in particular crisis mode, and that was a huge blessing. Uh, this past year, I found a little bit of extra money and I bought one of those little circle robot vacuums. And she is now, well, we call her Swiper. We'll let one of our daughters name her. I don't know if Swiper's a he or a she, but Swiper is now one of the favorite members of our house. That little robot vacuum goes around sucking up the dog hair off the floor, getting little things, and it has lowered the stress level for my wife, who works, takes care of 4 kids, takes care of me, has all of these church obligations. The floor stays pretty clean with that little robot, so it was a couple $100, but paying for a house cleaner is a lot of money every week. This is a one-time purchase, so get yourself one of those little robot vacuums, and you don't have to vacuum near as much. Another thing that you just really are is important for you to do: learn to say no and stop comparing yourself to normal families. You have extra weight that you're carrying, and you can't do everything that other families do. This is one of the worst parts of the social media world that we live in, is we end up not even comparing ourselves to any normal family. We compare ourselves to the composite of what every family that we know is doing on their best days. So like it's all of the vacations of all of the families, all of the happy times, all of those people who lost weight and hit their goal and look amazing right now. All of those people that learn an amazing hobby, so they're fishing and rocking a sport, and they just ran a marathon while learning to woodwork, and we just feel like we suck when we look at this stuff. So you maybe just get off of normal Facebook altogether, but more than that, you're not a normal family. I don't know if there is such thing as a normal family, but if you've got a special needs situation in your home, you're just not normal. I'll give you an example in my house. So I'm a pastor, and one of the things that feels like it should be normal for a pastor is to have guests in our home. And I my wife loves to host, and I love to host. Uh, but we've been through a very long period of time where the emotions in our household are unpredictable at night. And so I don't it's really hard to invite people over because I don't know what it's going to be like. It could be a totally peaceful night, or it could be um, just an explosion happening, sometimes literally an explosion happening. And it's hard to predict that. So even on the nights where nothing happens, you burn a lot of emotional energy living in anticipation of it happening. But it's especially hard to think of having people over, especially people you're trying to get to know new. And so we've relieved ourselves of feeling the burden and obligation of being a quote normal family and having people over. There'll be times in our life where that will happen. There's times where other families invite us over. If we can get sitters for our special needs child, we'll do that. But we're not normal. We're special, right? We're not normal, and so we should just relieve ourselves from that. Just one other thought, and these are all like kind of big term strategies for special needs. And again, you might have to listen to this a couple times, or just if I say one thing that helps you that you can do, maybe just stop listening at that point. Focus on that one thing, because if you hear it all, you might feel like you suck because you can't do all of the things that I'm talking about. These are just kind of brainstorm strategies for you. Another is learn to batch things to get more time. This is something I'm actually pretty decent at. You know that there's several things that are just like you have to do on a normal basis. If you can learn to clump those things together, you can free up time. So you could batch cook meals to reduce prep for the other night. So let's say maybe Sunday evening becomes the time where you're going to batch. You're actually going to spend longer time prepping and cooking, and maybe you can get your kids involved in this, several meals for the week, and then you have you don't spend all of that time prepping and cooking throughout the week. The other thing, just special needs wise, that we've kind of realized is we're just going to buy fast food more. We're going to eat out more. Hopefully, we are not going to buy unhealthy fast food all the time, but some nights it's just too exhausting because the special needs situation has taken all of the energy and time that should be for cooking. So we've relieved ourselves of the guilt of that. We've budgeted a little more for that. And how do we pay for that budget? Well, I bought a pair of clippers, and I learned to cut my own hair and cut my kids' hair sometimes. Cut my hair all the time unless I have a fancy wedding that I have to do. Then I'll splurge for a haircut. But all of that, all of that haircut money for my hair. I guess that's where we pay for our fast food. Let's Parent on Purpose has always been about equipping moms and dads to build thriving families centered around the hope of the gospel. If you regularly listen to this podcast, you're actually among a community of parents that spans 68 countries, including many in the 1040 window, where there are few churches and limited access to the gospel. As the amount of content I produce over the years grows, so do the cost of maintaining, storing, and producing all of the different details that help make this show helpful. If God has put you in a place where you might be able to help a little bit and support this work, would you please consider going to letsparentonpurpose.com/support and either giving a one-time gift or becoming a regular supporter through Patreon? If you're not in a good place to support the show, that's fine. I pray you continue listening, growing, and sharing it with others. That's it. No hard push. Just a simple request that if you're able to and would like to, help share the load of the show at www.letsparentonpurpose.com/support. Another question. So that was all under question 1, and that's the longest answer. But there were some other questions that parents sent in that I think are just ones I have thoughts on. How do you take time for yourself without feeling worried or guilty about being away from disabled loved ones? Let me just say this. Guilt does not motivate us towards doing loving things. And so if you are feeling guilty about taking time for yourself because you're not with your special needs loved one, you're not loving your special needs loved one anymore. Actually, what you're doing is growing in resentment towards them because you can't even take any time for yourself. So, if you have the opportunity and you get the time, not that you're going to just completely leave them and not take care of their needs, but if you get the time to have, a momentary or regular space away, do it. Stop feeling guilty. Your guilt isn't making them get any better or feel any better. It's making you worse. And Jesus didn't redeem you on Calvary so that you walk in guilt about not being a super person, not being perfect. Jesus got away. Jesus was here to redeem the world, and yet he got away often, very, very often. Jesus went to lonely places. Jesus went to isolated places, and he was God incarnate. If Jesus needed time away from the crushing needs of humanity, then you need to stop feeling guilty if you get the opportunity to be away. If your special needs loved one starts to guilt you on it, remember they are not God, and they are not the boss, and they are not in control, and you still get to get away. Speaking of guilt, next question. Should I feel guilty for using technology with my kids as a source of a break for myself? Nope. Would you like me to elaborate? Sure. In an ideal world, I wouldn't let my kids use screens. I don't live in an ideal world. I live in a sinful, broken, fallen world. And sometimes screens are helpful. Not everything on a screen is brain rotting. And even some of the stuff that is, it's not evil and bad. And I just can't be on, and I can't expect my wife to be on 24 hours a day. And sometimes with special needs kids, especially in the world we're living in where it's harder and harder and less people live in situations where you can just let your kids go outside and play, especially if you have a special needs situation. Monitor what's on the screens, limit what's on the screens, but also take that technology as a gift from God and catch your breath or take a nap or be numb or whatever you need to do for that time. Just don't participate in sin and then thank the Lord for whatever it is that that screen gave you a break for. I think in some sense with COVID, every family's become a special needs family, and we're all using screens more than we want to, more than we should. And we probably could just go ahead and relieve ourselves of feeling guilty about that because it's not helping. Another question. What are some calming strategies for myself during long behaviors and meltdowns? Here's some ones that I think are helpful. Breathing. Breathing is actually extremely helpful. And I just heard, I think it was on a recent podcast I did with Sissy Goff. She was talking about teaching children who are in overwhelming anxiety and stress the practice of deep breathing because it's like 30 seconds or something like that of deep breathing helps reset something in your brain and it helps reconnect thing. And so the same thing with us. Learn to not just breathe, but take deep breaths. Other calming strategies: walking, um, deep stretching. I have some chronic back issues that I fought for a number of years, and so I have learned to practice some yoga and stretching routines that have just really. What's interesting is not only have they relieved my back, but I've just felt them relieve stress from my body. Memorizing passages of scripture, that's another huge one. And I suggest that you memorize passages and not just a verse, because the time that it takes to memorize a passage and repeat a passage is sometimes that the amount of time that you need for God to reset your mind. You might say, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And I can say that in one breath, and I can say that inside 2 seconds, and everything's the same on the other side. But if I go to Matthew 6 and I start working through Jesus' passage on anxiety, where Jesus says, therefore I tell you, do not worry about what you shall eat or what you shall drink or what you shall put on. Isn't the life more than clothing and the body more than food? Or and then you walk through that passage where he talks about the looking at the birds of the air and the flowers of the field and all of these. It takes some time and concentration to remember it, to memorize it in the first place, and then remember it. And I have often found that God relieves and releases my stress and anxiety as I work through that passage. In addition to scriptures, I've taken to regular use of this great resource by the Northumbria, which I'll just put a link in the show notes. The Northumbria community. It's morning, noon, and evening prayers, and they're kind of set prayers. And I picked them up this past summer in 2020. In the morning prayer and the noon prayer, I'm actually really bad at the evening prayer consistency, but I love them. And they've gotten into my heart, and especially the end of the noon prayer is one that I find myself repeating over and over again, and that's just there's a blessing at the end of it that let nothing disturb thee, nothing affright thee. All things are passing, God never changeth. Patient endurance attaineth to all things. Who God possesseth, and nothing is wanting. Alone God sufficeth. And just that reminder that everything is passing except God. It just helps calm me during times when things are awful. Another question asked was, what online caregiver support groups are available? And I think honestly, the best answer I have for that is this is perhaps the best part of Facebook. There's a group for everything. There's a people for everything. We found reactive attachment disorder groups, foster parent groups, um, moms with kids with cancer groups. I'm on a youth pastor group. I'm on a wood turning group for pen turning. And so you'll find people that are going through what you're going through. And then what I would suggest with that is spend the amount of time on there that is helpful for you, but not all of your time. For instance, my wife found a lot of support and encouragement by being in the like parent with children with leukemia support group. I did not. I felt like every day was a notification of another child relapsing or dying of leukemia. While I wanted to have compassion for them all, I just couldn't take it because I realized it kind of left me in a constant state of worry that my son was going to relapse at any time. So, what was supportive for one spouse was not helpful for the other, and we gave each other the grace for that. Next question. How can you gently suggest to another person you're observing in burnout to seek help? This is where I'd go back and remind you what I said earlier, that Jesus Christ himself took naps, he got away, he slept. And as important as our special needs relatives are, I don't think that we can say that they're more important than Jesus' mission of redeeming the entire world. So just remind them, hey, once upon a time, God spent 33 years on this earth as a human, and he needed breaks. He needed naps. He needed rest. He had an off switch, and I love you, and I think you need to follow Jesus in that and take a break. And then you help them to figure out how to take the break. Don't just guilt them with how they need to take a break. Here's a great question. What are some practical tools for working on communicating with my spouse when we are both constantly in crisis mode? Very good question, and I've been there. Especially there was 1 year of the 3.5 year cancer journey that was incredibly intense to us. And then kind of the whole foster and adoptive journey has left us in some level of crisis mode for, man, like 8 years, 9 years. I'm losing track. So here's just some thoughts to help you, husbands and wives, with communicating when you're both constantly in crisis mode. First, text and emojis are good for reminding you that you love each other, for caring about each other, and looking forward to seeing one another. Text is terrible for communicating negative feelings. So, first off, stop communicating anything with your spouse that might be perceived as negative through a text or email. That's what a phone call and, most importantly, a face to face situation is for. Text and emojis, pass information like, a, you know, any appointments, times like that, and then encouraging things like, I love you. I'm really looking forward to seeing you. I'm so happy to be walking through this battle with you. I'm really proud of you. Learn to use your little unicorn and puppy dog emojis. That's what text is good for. It's awful for telling them, I'm really disappointed with the way that you did this. So stop using it for that. And since you're stopping using it with your spouse, stop using it with everybody else for that. Nobody else wants to hear your disappointment through text or email either. Have some courage and pick up the phone or schedule some time to be with them. If you're not bold enough to do that face to face or at least through the phone, then don't do it. Keep it to yourself, take it to the Lord, and get over it. Other practical tools for communicating with your spouse: have sex. If you don't feel up for having sex, then fool around with each other like you tried to stop doing before you were married. If you don't feel up for fooling around, then schedule a 15-minute massage with one another where you're not allowed to talk about stressful things. There's something amazingly therapeutic and chemical releasing of happiness inside your body with physical touch. But I know sometimes sex is really helpful for that. And sometimes, whatever the situation might be, sex could make it worse. But physical touch, unless you're in some extreme situation, physical touch, sometimes with no pressure for sex afterwards, can be really relieving for a spouse. So do what works for you guys, but don't forget that, man, God gave you that as a gift. And speaking of spouses, I'm just such a huge proponent of regularly scheduled dates with your spouse. There's so many different ways to do this. Sometimes because of time and circumstances, you don't have money or availability to get out of the house. So put your kids to bed, give them Benadryl if you can, unless it's Benadryl that makes them go screwy. Close your bedroom door and have a date. Have dinner in bed. Watch a movie in your room. There are creative ways that you can have dates even when you're limited on transportation, money, and time. Another cool thing you could do is you could find a podcast or something like that that you guys can listen to on your individual walk or drive time that gives you something to talk about when you're back together. Because I think it's just important that you have something to talk about beyond the crisis and the nuts and bolts that you're walking through. And so, Let's Parent on Purpose is an awesome podcast for that. Let me give an advertisement for my own podcast, but there's plenty out there. Maybe you both have an interest in a particular thing. Find a way to do that. Podcasts are just an awesome way so that you have something else to talk about. How do I protect myself from trauma when my child has physical behaviors often? Man, sometimes you can't, and that really sucks. But sometimes you can limit the trauma. And in our house, we've come to the realization that our daughter might not always be able to live in our home. It's sad and it hurts my ego as a super parent, but sometimes it's just not healthy. And I think in our family, we ended up being really late understanding the amount of trauma that the other children were experiencing as we went through particularly difficult times in our home. So the earlier you can normalize therapy or talking to counselors or even having a mentor in their church that they're able to talk to, if you can't afford therapy and counselors, the better off they'll be. It needs to be normalized in your family, that we talk about things and that we have people outside of our home to talk about. And sometimes it's really important for you to have, if you have other children, for you to have somebody for them to talk to who can kind of be the light bulb and radar for you because you're so in it, you may not realize what's happening with your other children, and you need to have those people in your life. So, Last one, this is kind of practical, but also awful. My child doesn't sleep and I'm exhausted. What are some ways that I can restore rest? Phew. This one's awful, and we've been there, and it makes you want to quit life. So, my suggestion: talk to your pediatrician, your psychiatrist, or whoever you have to. Our child takes a really strong dose of medicine to go to sleep. In a hypothetical world, I think I might be anti-medicines. Maybe I would have an ethical problem with giving a child a very strong dose of something to go to sleep. But when we're panicking, when we're losing our sanity, and when we're growing in contempt for our child, I get less high minded. Plus, what we found out is our daughter actually needs the meds to get healthy sleep, just in the way that her brain is wired. Additionally, my wife and I take melatonin regularly, and if needed, we'll take an additional sleep aid beyond that. Because on a pretty consistent basis, because of kind of long term trauma that we've experienced, there's a tendency to wake up in the middle of the night with your adrenaline going 90 miles an hour. And if your adrenaline's going 90 miles an hour and when you wake up, you don't fall back asleep quick. You don't get good sleep. Trauma sucks. It just sucks. So take naps in the middle of the day. Stop your caffeine intake after 10 a.m. Get off the screens as you get closer to bedtime. Pray for the broken things in the world to help you remember that you're not the only one dealing with bad things, and you're not dealing with the worst thing ever. Keep your heart connected to the heart of Jesus for the lost. That's been really important for us as we go through long-term trauma and special needs, is to remember we're not the center of the universe, and that there are more broken people out there in the world. And so learning to pray with our kids for the orphans in India, for the people that don't know Jesus, for our neighbors and the struggles that they're going through, even if they're much less than what we're going through, growing that heart of compassion just helps. So hey, this was a long list, and but again, I think that if you're not in this situation, you're probably not listening at this point. And if you are in a special needs family, I commend you that you made it, 35 to 40 minutes through a podcast. I'm glad that there was enough peace in your house to do it, and I hope that at least something in here will be of help to you. So. I'm for you. I'm with you. You can feel free to email me at jay@letsparentonpurpose.com. If you've got another specific question, I'll try to help you or point you in a direction that it will. And let me just close with prayer. Lord, I pray for my dear friends who are listening right now. It's a broken world, and there's a lot of suffering, and sometimes there's a lot of suffering in our homes as we deal with the long-term fallout of sin and the curse that causes through physical and mental challenges in our home. I pray for those listening that the peace of Christ would guard their hearts and minds in Christ Jesus, and that nothing would disturb them, that nothing would affright them, that they would remember that all things are passing and that God never changes. Lord, give us the patient endurance to stay to the end, and to remember that if we have you, that we have all that we need, and that you will provide all that we need. Give us hope, give us endurance, and give us help. And please surround us with the people that can help us to carry through as we need. We love you. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Thanks for listening. Friend, if you're still listening all the way to the credits, then I hope that means that this was a particular blessing to you to hear this podcast. If so, I want to encourage you to share it with somebody else that you think might be helped by it. You're welcome to go to letsparentonpurpose.com to find out more information about show notes, about past issues, all kinds of things to help your family. And I do want to say that Let's Parent on Purpose is a user-supported podcast. And if you would like to be a part of that, you can go to letsparentonpurpose.com, learn how to be a supporter through Patreon or through a one-time gift. Thank you so much for listening. Again, share this with somebody that you know needs to hear it. Remember that parenting is a marathon, not a sprint, and we'll talk to you soon.